We've established our link with the ODBC data source driver in Windows. We're now ready to actually connect our QuickBooks file to an Access database. Now please keep in mind I'm using Microsoft Access for this demonstration, but this is equally as powerful working with SQL Server and other database programs. I've worked with many firms that have actually tied their QuickBooks inventory directly to their catalog that is located on a website. Let's go into Microsoft Access, where I've opened a blank company file. I am simply going to go to New and then down to Import Table. When I choose Import Table, it'll bring my files in once, but the two are not connected. If, however, I choose Link Table, then my Access database and QuickBooks file will be connected. You should do a little research on the implications of linking. It works very nicely, but there are some restrictions that are involved. Let's go to Import Table and say OK. On the bottom of my screen now, I'm actually going to go down to where it says ODBC Sources. Here, I'm going to choose the machine data source for my QuickBooks data and say OK. Now once I say OK, it actually connected to my QuickBooks file. What you now see in front of you are the list of all the tables that actually are associated with QuickBooks, and you'll notice that there are quite a few. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm just going to simply select them all and say OK. Now traditionally you may not want to choose all of these, as it can create for a lot of transfer time and a particularly large file. However, initially you do need to understand the different tables that actually are hooked together in the background for QuickBooks. In databases, we need to set up and establish relationships between tables. In other words, we always have to have common denominators between two tables in order to get them to appear on a report. What you'll need to do is to understand what those common denominators and what those links are in the background. For instance, I can have a customer file and an inventory file. Initially, there is no relationship between those two files. The relationship comes in when I go from working with my inventory, customer, and invoice. In essence, on the invoice, I will actually link together the customer with a particular item. When I create the invoice and link these two together within that invoice, now I can actually go in the background and use those two components on a report. Understanding that background connection between the two is really very important. Now, as you can tell, it has been loading all these objects as I've been talking, and you'll note that it's a fairly lengthy procedure. Please keep in mind that I'm actually loading a sample file, which means it's going to go a little bit quicker than your real data. So give yourself time when you're going through this. You may want to strip down your accounts to just bare data, then pull it into Access or another database, and then the first thing you want to do is just study the accounts that come through. Get a feel for all the different tables that are now located in the background. You'll notice just for sales tax that I have an item sales tax group, and sales tax group online. So there's a number of different files that tie into each one. In Access now, if I would like to see a particular item, I can double click on it and it shows me all of the fields that would come through from QuickBooks. At this point, if for instance I choose to go into sales, I'll see all of the items that refer to the sales themselves. Once I've brought in all of the information, I can now go into the report screen, and when I create new, I can actually create a report from scratch. This will now pull up all of the different tables that I've pulled in and will ask me which of the fields I'd like from all of those tables. So in this particular case, if I'm to choose customer, I can now create the customer report based on the information that I'd actually like. Of course, this particular movie is only intended to give you an introduction to working with this tool. You'll want to go in and play around with it a bit. It goes without saying that it takes you to a completely different level when you start working with QuickBooks and the ODBC connection.